Camera also. Undo the camera.
Good morning, everyone. For those joining us on Zoom and live stream, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Janice, Project Officer from the Anti-Death Penalty Asia Network, ADPAN, together with my colleagues from Amnesty International Malaysia and the Transformative Justice Collective in Singapore. We have called for this joint press conference between Malaysia and Singapore because we are currently at a very critical moment. There are 5 men that are at imminent risk of execution currently in Singapore. 4 of them are Malaysian nationals: Dacinamurti Kataya, Paneerselvam Prantaman, Saminathan Selvaraju, and Lingeswaran Rajendran, alongside Jumaat bin Muhammad Said, a fellow Singaporean. Unfortunately, just yesterday, we have received a tragic news. Dacinamurti and his family has received an execution notice just yesterday morning, with the execution date set for Thursday. Singapore has already executed 10 men this year, including 2 Malaysians. In August of 2025, Singapore granted clemency to 1 person on death row, which is the first one in almost 3 decades, since 1998. While we welcome this rare decision, it again only highlights the unfairness and cruelty of the death penalty for many others who are still at risk. So today, we are calling on the Malaysian and Singaporean governments to act immediately. Malaysia must do its due diligence to protect our own nationals who are at risk, and Singapore must implement the immediate moratorium on the death penalty and refrain from issuing any further execution notice. We are also joined today by some family members of people who are affected by the death penalty in both Singapore and Malaysia, some who are joining us in solidarity, including families whose loved ones have recently had their sentences reduced through Malaysia's resentencing process. We also have some of our civil society organization friends and our fellow friends who have long fought together with us in this journey for justice and abolition. Today, you will hear about the urgent situation in Singapore, the personal stories of the families of those who are impacted. We have some statements to read out, and why urgent action is absolutely critical from both our governments. We will also be sharing ways for the publics to be able to engage and help stop this execution. So with that, I would like to now pass over to our colleagues in Singapore, the Transformative Justice Collective, to share some updates from their end.
Hi, thanks, Janice. So can everyone hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
So as Janice said, we do note that Malaysia has abolished the mandatory death penalty, and that's great, and also through the resentencing greatly reduced their death row population. But then in Singapore, what we see instead is a doubling down, right? So as Janice said, there's already been 10 executions this year, 2 Malaysians. And so far, everyone on death row, as far as we know, has been convicted of drug offenses. And we're seeing that they are, wanting to continue with more executions, right? So there are multiple people at imminent risk of execution. And in this press conference, we are highlighting 5 cases, 4 of whom are Malaysians. And it really shows how Singapore continues to buck the international trend of moving away from capital punishment. This year, as Janice said, we also saw the first presidential clemency granted in 27 years. And according to the Ministry of Home Affairs, the grounds was because there was a disparity of outcome with another person who'd been arrested in the same operation, but was tried separately. And often we find that actually a disparity of outcomes in the mandatory death penalty regime in Singapore is actually very often a product of prosecutorial discretion, right? So they have a lot of power in deciding how to charge somebody, how to frame the charge. Also their power to grant or withhold a certificate of substantive assistance, which had a lot of implications for prisoners like Paneer. And so to us, this really reinforces the unjust and arbitrary nature of the mandatory death penalty. And also in our experience, we've heard from family members, both of people still on death row or people who have already been executed, that while they're very happy that somebody got clemency at last after so many years, it's also on the other end, also very distressing to them because they find it very difficult to understand why this did not apply to their loved ones, right? Where very often there are also disparity of outcomes in cases. The men whose cases we are highlighting at the press conference today have also themselves already experienced far more injustice and trauma beyond their death sentences. So for example, Panir, Saminathan, and Dutch had their private correspondence illegally forwarded by the prison to the Attorney General's chambers, which is also the state prosecution. And to get this ruling from the court that this was unlawful behavior, it was a very, very hard fight in the courts, right? They had to push repeatedly because the case was initially rejected by the courts and they had to still keep going. And for chunks of that case, even without legal representation. And it took so long to even get that sort of recognition that it was unlawful. And even so, we feel like the redress that they got for that was nowhere near meaningful for the injustice that they suffered. Panir and Dutch also had to suffer through having their execution scheduled even when they should not have been. So, for example, in 2022, Dutch was given an execution notice, even though that prison correspondence case was still ongoing and he was part of that case, right? He had to fight and represent himself in both the High Court and the Court of Appeal on the same day to argue for a stay of execution, and he actually won. And Panir also, twice in 2019 and also earlier this year was given execution notices, which later got stays of execution like just the day before. So in these cases, even though they were given stays of execution, it still puts the family and the prisoners through a huge amount of trauma that they really shouldn't have gone through, because the fact that the courts are granting these stays of execution show that there were very valid reasons why they shouldn't have been scheduled in the first place. So to have already been put through this trauma multiple times, we think is very unfair and grounds for them to be granted clemency. So we've also seen in recent years, we've had a change in leadership in Singapore. We have a new prime minister, and along with Prime Minister Lawrence Wong coming in, has been multiple questions of what's going to be different in Singapore. Is he going to be different from previous PAP leaders, right? And I think the death penalty really creates an opportunity for him to demonstrate some leadership in leading Singapore to move away from capital punishment. So far, we've not heard him say anything about the death penalty. He's not publicly taken a position himself. And I think, as Prime Minister, he should show some leadership and responsibility in addressing how the death penalty for drug offenses that Singapore has violates international standards and international law, and what is he going to do about it. So we did hear yesterday that Dutch now has an execution notice, and so his family are only have 4 days notice of his execution, because this is not his first execution notice. It's a new practice by the government here that if you've had an execution notice previously, your new one will give you a shorter period of advance notice. So it used to be 7 days for everybody, no matter what. But now if you have a second or third execution notice, they're only giving you and your family 4 days notice. We really don't understand what is the justification for this. Like, I cannot see any valid reason why this should be the case, except cruelty and giving families and prisoners less time to come to terms with it or to fight the execution if that's what they choose, right? So why should prisoners and their families be robbed of time together just because the authorities had wrongfully scheduled executions in the past? Yeah.
We've been bracing for this execution notice that just got yesterday since the constitutional challenge that he and 3 others filed in 2022 was dismissed in late August 2025, so just about less than a month ago. And this was the last in a string of joint applications brought by prisoners on death row from around 2021 to today. And as many as 36 prisoners have come together to file some of these challenges. And this is in itself, I think, needs to be recognized as remarkable acts of courage and really, I would say, unique to the Singapore context, because death row prisoners have such a difficult time finding lawyers to represent them that we've seen for years, many of them in groups bringing joint actions by themselves and educating themselves on the law and fighting for their constitutional rights, fighting for their human rights independently. Many of them, obviously, none of them are lawyers, but they train themselves and work very hard to challenge the unjustness of the death penalty regime in Singapore. So in almost all of these cases, the prisoners have been without legal counsel. And some of the issues they've raised through these cases, like for one, they've challenged the fairness of the certificate regime, which allows the judge to opt for a non-capital offense, a non-capital sentence. But the judge can only give them the non-capital sentence if the AGC issues them with a certificate of substantive assistance. And many of them have brought challenges against why they were denied a certificate of assisting when they had provided information. And again, this highlights arbitrariness and the amount of power that the executive has, that the AGC and CNB have in determining who gets the death sentence and who doesn't. And the like Kirsten mentioned earlier, they also brought to light the prison's legal practice of forwarding their private letters between themselves and their lawyers and family members to the AGC. This practice was first discovered by Dutch and another prisoner, Saeed, when they saw that letters that they had sent to their lawyers were included in the AGC's submissions to the court in some of their cases. So they've been doing investigative work, legal work. They've also raised how most people on death row in Singapore are ethnic minorities from low-income backgrounds and questioned whether this signals to discrimination or structural problems in the system. And one of the landmark cases was when in 2022, 24 death row prisoners brought a case regarding the barriers they faced appointing lawyers to help them. The main thrust of their case was that the fear of cost orders and disciplinary actions that lawyers face when filing late-stage applications has prevented lawyers from assisting them out of fear, and this has undermined their constitutional right to access justice. This case was dismissed, and in May 2024, 36 prisoners, I think the largest ever, came together to file a civil suit on the blanket ban that the government has on providing legal aid to them for post-appeal cases. Regardless of whether the cases were assessed to have merit or not, there was a blanket ban saying that they cannot access any legal aid, so they would have to pay for a lawyer, even if they had a human rights case to bring. 36 prisoners also brought a civil suit challenging the constitutionality of a law called the Post-Appeal in Capital Cases Act, which was passed in 2022 and came into effect in 2024. This is a highly problematic law that introduces even more onerous barriers for death row prisoners who wish to file further applications. There are two particularly alarming provisions in this law, which the prisoners highlighted in their case. According to this law, a prisoner who's had his criminal appeal dismissed must obtain permission from the Court of Appeal before he can file an application to stay his execution. This law includes a provision which states that in deciding whether to grant permission, the court must consider whether the prisoner's intended application has a reasonable prospect of success. Such a condition denies an applicant recourse to the processes of the court on grounds of a predictive exercise at the outset of proceedings. This is what the prisoners argued in the case. They also challenged another provision in the law that allows the court to summarily dismiss the application for permission without even granting them an oral hearing. This prevents the applicant from addressing the court or effectively presenting their arguments before the court on an application which their life hinges upon. All these cases that I've mentioned were ultimately dismissed, with the exception of the prison correspondence case, in which the court made declarations that the practice of forwarding the prisoner's private letters to the AGC was illegal. But all this meant for the prisoners in material terms was that 3 of them got a nominal sum of $10 in damages for copyright infringement. And this was a real slap in the face for many of them. The prisoners' final hope was the constitutional challenge against the use of double presumptions in the Misuse of Drugs Act, which 3 Malaysians, Saminathan, Dakshinamurthy, Lingeshwaran, and 1 Singaporean, Jumat, had brought. They've been fighting this case for the past 3 years, right? And we were very hopeful that this challenge would be successful, that surely the court would see that the threshold of evidence they were expected to provide was too high to protect the presumption of their innocence. To laypersons like us, it seems obvious that asking an ordinary person to provide strong and convincing evidence of their innocence is unreasonable. The duty to provide evidence of guilt should be on the prosecution, and that is what innocent until proven guilty means in our understanding. And it is dangerous for Singapore to continue to rely on legal presumptions to convict someone, especially in a capital offense. When no local lawyers were willing to represent Dachna and the others in this case, senior British and Australian lawyers stepped in because they found the presumptions to be a gross violation of the presumption of innocence. But Dutch was forced to argue in court why these lawyers should be admitted to represent them, but the Singapore courts ultimately did not allow it. So the prisoners continued to represent themselves until quite late in the case, some Singaporean lawyers took it on. And like we mentioned earlier, at the end of last month, this case was dismissed. We also want to add that the plight of prisoners on death row in Singapore has consistently gotten worse over the years. When the prisoners started organizing themselves in 2022 to file human rights cases, laws like the PACC were introduced, making it even harder for them, but also prison conditions made it harder and created more barriers to them bringing cases. For example, in things like getting the prison registry to file something for them, asking for commissioner of oaths. One of the greatest problems that the prisoners have highlighted is that in the last year, they've been moved to smaller cells that are further apart from each other with solid doors, making it close to impossible for them to shout to and talk to their cell neighbors like they used to be able to. The prison is not also allowing them to talk with fellow prisoners who are involved in joint applications so that they can prepare for their cases. Many other restrictions have been introduced to visits as well with their family members and what they're allowed to pass, what kinds of documents they're allowed to pass each other. Many of the prisoners rely on their family members to pass legal documents back and forth because they don't have lawyers. But the prison has now said that family members cannot pass legal documents during a visit. It will either have to be mailed by post, which will take weeks to reach them, and court timelines don't accommodate these delays, or it has to be only handed to them by a lawyer. And so these are just some of the many barriers that the prisoners have been facing. And they've also said that they feel more intimidated now to bring any cases, and that they more and more of them feel hopeless and depressed is what they've been communicating with their families. Time and time again, we've also highlighted that the no contact visit policy on Singapore's death row, even in the days leading up to an execution, are particularly cruel in preventing families from providing each other comfort. So I just want to end this with a quote from Dutch, who's scheduled to be executed this Thursday. He wrote this to us in one of his letters, said, "I'm not ashamed for who I am now, and I will not bow my head to anyone except God. I am not afraid. I will stand tall and keep my head up, even if I have to die. People can only kill my body. After that, they can do nothing more." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten and Cookie, for that very comprehensive update on the recent developments in Singapore. I would also now be sharing very briefly on the story of one of them as well, which is who is also at risk, Panir Selvam Prantaman, a fellow Malaysian national who has been on death row in Singapore since 2017. As you know, for a long time now, ADPAN, Amnesty, and TJC have long campaigned for Panir, alongside many other NGOs. In 2017, Panir was convicted for importing over 51 grams of heroin and sentenced to the mandatory death penalty, despite evidence that he was a mere courier and he had provided substantive information to the authorities. Singapore's Attorney General Chambers has denied him the certificate of substantive assistance. Therefore, he had to face the mandatory death sentence. Pane's case has also faced serious legal obstacles, including no legal representation during police questioning, as mentioned by Kirsten and Koki earlier, limits on post-conviction appeals, denial of legal aid, and breaches of confidential communication with his lawyers. Most recently, on the 5th of September, the Singapore's Court of Appeal has dismissed his final appeal under the PACC, even though disciplinary proceedings against his former lawyer is still unresolved. Pane has now spent over 7 years on death row, and this is again a clear example of how harsh and injustice Singapore's death penalty system is. With no further legal proceedings pending, there is nothing that is standing in the way for Singapore to issue an execution notice. I would also like to share the other side on Pane because I think it's a very important side of who Pane is as a person. He has worked to rebuild and to continue to give back to society. As we know, he has written poetry, he has written songs that are filled with showing us the importance and the power of second chances. Most recently, he has come up with his own book, his Death Row Literature, a collection of poems from Pane's servant cantonment, which describes to us his experience being behind bars and the stories and the trauma that he experienced being behind prison. All this work that he has done shows us that we are capable of growth and healing, even after facing the most difficult and the most traumatic circumstances. I will also be reading a statement from Pane's family. They aren't able to join us today because they are currently in Singapore to visit him. So allow me, with their permission, I'll be reading this out loud. We understand that the existing laws determined and implemented by the government provide the mandatory death penalty for drug trafficking. We understand that the law is very rigid and judges often have no discretion because they are bound by the Misuse of Drugs Act. Without a certificate of substantive cooperation, the judge must impose the death penalty. But we feel that the death penalty for drug trafficking is disproportionate. It's punishing Pane with the harshest possible sentence, even though he was only a courier and not a kingpin. His personal intent and culpability are much lower than that of drug laws. Furthermore, others, including Malaysia, have moved away from the use of the mandatory death penalty. We are concerned that Singapore has repeatedly gone after small-time couriers while the masterminds behind drug syndicates walk free. We urge Singapore to use its resources to trace supply networks across the region rather than settling for quick fixes. Even from death row in Changi prison, Pane has devoted much of his time and energy to thinking about how to do good and how to help others. It was at his urging that our family set up Sabaran Kasih, an NGO that works with marginalized communities. He has written songs that have since been produced in collaboration with Malaysian artists. His first collection of poetry, Death Row Literature, was published recently. Its official launch will be taking place in KL this coming Saturday. There is so much more than Pane can do and contribute. We believe that he deserves mercy and redemption, and we hope that the Singapore government and the president can exercise their powers to grant him clemency. As Christians, we urge our fellow believers in Singapore to speak up for Pane and all the other death row prisoners. We believe that God cares for all the humble and poor inmates and that they will find mercy with him. As believers in the sanctity of life, all Christians should speak up against the use of the death penalty. Pane and many others on death row are Malaysian citizens. Malaysia must operate with integrity if we are ever to achieve meaningful reform. The Malaysian government must take proactive steps to protect the life of its citizens abroad who are on death row and facing execution, especially as Malaysia is the ASEAN chair this year. Failing to defend Malaysians overseas means Malaysia has not yet reached the true standard of justice that our own laws should uphold. All right, so I think we have to go back to Koki to read a statement from Duchess family. So I'll back to you guys at TJC.
Thank you, Janice. So Duchess family was meant to be at the press conference today. His sister Rani and her husband had already made arrangements to come to KL to be in person because they thought it was really important for them to address the public and the media. Unfortunately, they couldn't because immediately after that, they got the notice. So they are now here in Singapore, visiting him in prison at the moment. So they've given me a message to read out on their behalf. Dutch has been on death row for 15 years. He's not the young, naive boy he was when he was arrested. He has grown into a disciplined, devoted man with great spiritual clarity, kindness, and social consciousness. So I asked the government of Singapore, who did you want to execute? Because he doesn't exist anymore. Like all other suspects in Singapore, he was interrogated without a lawyer present and without the opportunity to get legal advice. And he was read the mandatory death penalty notice before his questioning began, which put him in a state of shock during the statement taking. This is the beginning of a long stream of injustices Dutch and others accused of capital offenses face. Dutch has fought long and hard for what he and we, his family, know to be the truth. He was a mere courier, not a trafficker, and he was paid around $300 for transporting a package which he believed contained some low-level contraband. Because the payment they offered him was so low, he was even more convinced that it couldn't be something as risky as heroin. He is not protesting against all punishment or accountability for his actions. But the death penalty is too harsh and extreme a punishment for a young man's naive actions. He did not willfully hurt anyone. He was vulnerable and exploited by drug syndicates that prey on Malaysian migrant workers who commute to and from Singapore. Our family has tried again and again to show the Singapore government that our lives are worth fighting for. We have tried telling our story. We have tried legal challenge after legal challenge. We have begged for mercy from the president. We don't believe that the people of Singapore want this cruelty to continue, especially if they knew the truth about the injustices of the system, the horrors of life on death row. But the government continues to use their name to kill. This must come to an end.
I will, yeah. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Koki. I'll now hand it over to Chow Ying to just tell us a little bit about the response that Malaysia should give.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you those joining online as well. So 2 Malaysians has been killed in Singapore this year. 1 will be killed on Thursday. Another 3 is on imminent executions. I would say that Malaysia carry both a moral and legal responsibility to stop these executions. Now, we have prepared a 5-page press statement. But over these 5-page press statements cannot really begin to capture the full extent of the crushing legal and systemic barrier that the death penalty inmate face in Singapore. The obstacle is so deep and entrenched that they strip people of their dignity, silence their voices, and deny them even the most basic chance of justice. So, Malaysian government, this is just 5 pages. Please do read and carefully examine each of the legal and systemic barriers that we have faced. Christine has said it, Janice has said it, but I'll say it again. Absence of legal representation during police investigations, restrictive law that curtail any post-convictions appeal, denial of legal aids post-conviction in the critical stages, breach of privileged communications between lawyer and client, communications between the client and the lawyer was actually given to the Attorney General. And finally, legal presumptions, double presumptions that take away that put the burden of proof on the accused person. Malaysia has already announced and declared that by the highest court, that double presumption is unconstitutional. And all this are the legal barrier, systemic barriers that our brothers and sisters face in Singapore on the death penalty. So with such barrier entrenched in the system, we have to ask ourselves, is the execution fair and is it justice? Dash Muti's family supposed to come today. They couldn't because they are facing executions on Thursday. And I want to take a little bit of time to highlight about his case. Well, you have heard the family about who he is. Now, the person said, you're going to kill now, but he has actually come a long way. His case highlights the profound injustice of Singapore death penalty system, where a man facing executions have to force himself to act as a lawyer to represent himself in multiple complex legal proceedings. Despite being unrepresented, he managed to get a stay of executions, arguing for himself, in 2022 because of the breach of legal privilege that I mentioned earlier. And he not only argued for himself, he continued to advocate for other death row prisoners in Singapore as well. Someone who have no legal background, no legal training, have to face the Supreme Judge in the Singapore court. In November 2022, Dutch represented himself again and 3 other persons on death row in the High Court to challenge the presumption constitutionality in Singapore, the double presumptions that we mentioned. In Malaysia, we got the top lawyer to argue this before the federal court. And in Singapore, he has to make the application himself and argue because this is such an important rule of law, natural justice that we have to uphold. At that point in time, there's no lawyer that can help to represent him in that applications because of all the reprisals lawyers will face in Singapore when you take up cases like that. Abuse of court process, they will say that you take last minute applications and it will give you a lot of very high fine. So there's no lawyer, but a group of foreign senior counsel offered to help pro bono and would like to give legal representations to the 4 of them to argue this important. But for the foreign lawyers to be admitted and argue, it has to go through a court process again. So Dashni had to argue for himself, very complex argument, why he should allow the foreign counsels to represent themselves, to represent him in this legal challenge. And again, he has to face the most top legal mind in the country, while the foreign counsels can only listen and hear the arguments. But to be honest, I think those who have worked with him can testify how he has courageously, bravely appeared before the court and argued the cases. His courage in speaking the truth to power exposed how death penalty inmates are silenced by all these restrictive prison practices, deny fair trial, deny fair access to lawyer, and left the fight for their lives alone. This is a reality that underscores the deep unfairness of executing him and others in similar situations. I just want to read one sentence, one paragraph from this press statement. Individuals on death row in Singapore have raised serious concern about the extremely prohibitive barriers that they face in filing legal applications after their criminal appeals have concluded. They have also repeatedly brought up how difficult it is for them to engage lawyers in Singapore, given the risk of enormous fine, reprimands, costs that lawyers have to bear for taking up capital cases at later stage. Conditions on death row in Singapore have worsened over the years, with prisoners enduring isolations in solitary cells severely restricted communications between them and their loved one, and the prison's authority making it close to impossible for a person involved in the same legal challenge to confer with one another. This is the reality that we are talking about. And I believe the Malaysian government should at least study, examine, and look at their cases and take the appropriate actions. But of course, we are talking about Penny Xiaowen case, which we will have a book launch this Saturday. We will talk about him even more. But he is also at an imminent imminent risk of executions. He was denied certificate of corporations, even though he has given information about the drug syndicate both in Singapore and in Malaysia as well. He has a complaint against his former lawyer, who at the last minute, again, he has to face the court himself because his lawyer at the last minute discharged himself and no longer represent him. So, and he made a complaint to the Singapore Law Society. The complaint is still ongoing, but the court said that it is not a legal proceeding that can stop you stop the state from executing him. So all this is something that the advocate for abolition of death penalty, both in Malaysia, in Singapore, the lawyers, the international community have been working and following so closely on the development of the cases and the welfare of the family. But where is Malaysia during this whole process? Is it now time to step up? Malaysia has a moral duty to protect our citizens facing the death penalty abroad. Many young Malaysians, like what we have described, often are from disadvantaged socio-economic backgrounds. They are lured into these drug trades by syndicates, subject to harsh punishment, the harshest irreversible punishment, and facing all these systemic barriers in seeking justice. Having abolished the mandatory death penalty ourselves in 2023, maintain a moratorium for 8 years. We are almost there for 10 years of moratorium. Malaysia has demonstrated our commitment to a more humane and just approach to criminal justice. It must now extend this leadership beyond borders by actively advocating for protections of our own citizens facing execution overseas, especially under Singapore rigid and unforgiving mandatory death regime. I think to remain silent would be abandoning the vulnerable Malaysians in this dire situation in the foreign prisons, and we must act to honor the duty of a state to safeguard the dignity, rights, and life of our own people. What Malaysia can do now is to really use all diplomatic and even legal means to stop these executions, including diplomatic talk, including taking the case to perhaps ICJ, and also as a chair of ASEAN this year, it's coming to an end. Now it's already September. We do not have a lot of time left. But as the ASEAN chair, we should take this opportunity to show leadership, to show that abolishing of the death penalty in the regions will not actually compromise security, but on the other hand, it actually shows leaderships in upholding human dignity, international human rights law, and these are the things that we should move forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Chai and Janice and Koki and Kristen for speaking about all the different cases and the complexities of the use of the death penalty in Singapore. I think I just want to reiterate that this is Malaysia's chance now to continue to protect Malaysians abroad, to protect Panir, to protect Dakshinamurti, Saminathan, and Lingaswaran, who are now at risk of facing imminent execution in Singapore. So we are really calling on the Malaysian government to engage in swift and effective interventions to basically try to stop any of these executions from happening in the next few weeks. And I think we're just trying, as we bring a close towards the press conference, we want to share ways that civil society and the public can engage with all these cases. If you're wondering of ways to help, or if you want to attend more of these events, like Janice and Xiaoying have mentioned. Alfred, sorry, can you show the poster? There is this Saturday, there is a book launch happening. There's a book launch happening at Gerak Budaya this Saturday from 2 to 4:30. This is actually a collection of poems that Panir wrote whilst in prison in Singapore. And there will be letters read by his family members from Panir himself. There will also be poetry book performances, as well as a panel discussion with these panelists, and also tabla performances. So please join us this Saturday. You can find more information on this on either ADPAN or Amnesty Malaysia's social media. And one other way, sorry? And on Gerak Budaya's one as well. And then one other way you can participate is, sorry, okay, one more slide, sorry. Yeah. One more way that you can also help is to sign this petition that Amnesty Malaysia has been collecting for Panir Selvam, that urges the Malaysian Foreign Affairs Ministry to basically intervene and secure the commutation of Panir's death sentence. So far, we've collected over 4,000 petitions already since we launched this towards the end of last year. So it's still growing. So your petitions matter because we will present these petitions at some point to the Malaysian government, and the numbers show your support and how you can basically, help with this, help in these cases. And I'm gonna pass to TJC very momentarily to show if you're in Singapore, there's also ways for you to support.
Yeah, so we don't have a poster for this one because it's happened so suddenly, but tomorrow evening at Hong Lim Park, we will have a vigil for Dutch. And we invite everybody to show up.
Yes, 7 p.m.
At 7 p.m. at Hong Lim Park. And then next week on the 29th of September, again at Hong Lim Park, we'll have an event from 7 to 8:30 to talk about the organizations and institutions that are complicit in upholding the death penalty and carrying out executions, specifically focusing on the Attorney General's chambers, which has, as we said before, a huge amount of power in determining how much discretion the court is allowed to exercise because of the mandatory death penalty, because they can determine charges, but they also can determine whether or not to issue the certificate of cooperation. And because the AGC also holds the role as the government's legal advisor, even when there are clemency applications, the AGC gets to weigh in as the government's legal advisor. So they have a huge role to play, and we want to draw people's attention to that. We also have an ongoing petition online that's collecting signatures, demanding for immediate moratorium on the use of death penalty in Singapore, pending a very open and transparent review of the system. So that's one other way that people in Singapore can also participate.
Okay, thank you so much, Kristen. Now we would like to open the floor to any questions from the media in person, and also those joining online. You can ask questions in the Q&A, and we will be monitoring the questions there. Maybe I can start with in-person media first while we wait for online to ask questions, if any. Yes.
In regards to introduce the first,
I'm from BFM. In regards to Dutch's case, if any, what other legal avenues remain to delay or stop the scheduled execution on 25th September?
There are no legal avenues left for Dutch. So especially with the post-appeal and capital cases act coming into force, it really shortens timelines for applications too, and it really increases the bar for what kinds of cases will be allowed. And I think I described some of the provisions in the law earlier that are deeply undemocratic and deny access to fair trial. So yeah, Dutch has no more legal avenues left. And he has also made clear that he will not be filing any legal applications or a stay of execution in the next 3 days, because he wants to spend this time with his family and he has no hope left in the legal system in Singapore, is what he has said.
Yeah, there's no, any questions online? No, that's from the earlier one.
Oh, okay. No questions?
No questions? Okay. Then I think we can, are we moving? Yeah, we're going to. Then I think we can close this press conference, and if there's anything, you can contact the PICs on the press statement if you want to contact us for further interviews, or if you have any questions about any of the cases, we're all contactable. So I just want to say thank you so much to all the speakers, in Singapore and also here, and all the family members who have come here also in solidarity, and the CSOs who have come here for attending, and thank you. Yeah.
Want to take a picture?
And oh yes, sorry, and can we take a picture? Family members, if you want to join. And Kristen, Koki, can you please stay online while we take the photo? Yeah. There's placards also.
Maybe we just.
Yes, if you say yes, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, we got placards.
Is there anyone?
Yeah, you guys want to join us?
Yeah. They feel a bit lonely.
Koki, if you want to join.
Yeah.
With the side?
Yeah. Yeah, sit or stand.
We stand up, maybe?
Stand up.
Would it? Block? It won't block, is it?
So stand.
Can see, yeah. Yeah, come back.
Yeah, too far.
Yeah. One, two, three. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to those joining online as well. There's also food and drinks in the other room for those who want refreshments. And QR codes on the wall. Let's see. Yeah,
Sorry, I'm late.
you can get the link to the statement on the QR codes on the wall.